Welcome to Confessions about Confessional Writing with Megan Nolan. Megan, thanks so much for coming today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So we have a few questions. This is the fourth year of the Lit, and this is your second year back with us.
Yeah.
Thanks again for coming. So you did a workshop with us last year, but this year you are our Friday headliner, just because we loved you so much, so we had to get you and have a chat with you again. So first things first, tell me a little bit about your writing style and what makes you different.
So I suppose what I would have become known for originally, or like the first things that I did that got any sort of attention beyond, my friends or whatever. I wrote some essays it was about 2014 that I started seriously writing essays. And the sort of style that I started out working in was just very well, I was going to use the word basic. I don't mean that as an insult to myself, but just as in, quite bare style of prose and just quite plainly spoken. And I was just trying to describe these certain, mainly relationships or incidences that I had experienced. I was trying to just describe them really. And then that sort of led to a way of writing stylistically that I stuck with. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily still there now, but I think that's what got me attention in the first place, was that sort of very honest, very pretty unadorned, not super wordy, and pretty straightforward in a way, even though obviously dealing with things that were quite big and complex issues.
Brilliant. Okay. And what drew you to this type of writing?
So I used to write poetry when I was younger. I think a lot of people start out, writing poetry and then eventually transition to other things because, well, maybe for pretty prosaic, realistic reasons, because it's difficult to, get published in poetry compared to, say, journalism. It's a much more niche market. So I started out writing poetry when I was about 14, that sort of age. And I was pretty focused on that until I was in my late teen years, about 19 or 20. And that was pretty florid, quite dramatic and very emotional. And then when I started to turn into prose instead of poetry, I was trying to kind of get at similar things, these very intense feelings or things that had overwhelmed me at one point or another. But because it was prose and not poetry, I think I was trying to do that same work of addressing emotion, but doing it in a slightly more analytical way than pure emotion. So that, when I first started writing, I still think some of it's pretty good, but it was very raw. And while the later stuff could be considered raw as well, because it's very honest or it's about very intimate things, I guess I was trying to do things a bit more analytically or more considered maybe.
Yeah, kind of edited as well, I guess you could say.
Yeah,
kind
definitely, because there's the a lot of people sort of dismiss that sort of personal writing as being just like a diary, and it's I can see why people might think that, but I think part of the skill of getting good at that sort of writing is removing that total rawness and trying to polish it up in some way that is elegant or is interesting stylistically and not just raw emotion.
Yeah, and it's such a skill to be able to write like that as well. And speaking of your teenage years, how important was writing for your mental health?
That's a good question. For my mental health, I don't know how to quantify that really, because I'm obviously I'm 30, I'm not like ancient, but I think there is even a big difference between your generation and mine in terms of how you would speak about that sort of stuff when I was a teenager. So, I would have known what the terms were, but I don't think I would have really spoken about having any sort of mental health difficulties even while I was having them.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have consciously thought at the time, oh, this is helping me. But I think rather than, I think a lot of people would maybe think the answer to that question would be, oh, it's a good valve, it's good to get the feelings out, which of course that is true for a lot of people. For me, it was sort of more being good at something, like it was the only thing really I was any good at. And when you have something that you get some encouragement from somebody or other, that this is this is your area of talent, and if you work hard, you'll have some sort of place within it. It may not be, you might not be famous or rich from it, but you'll be able to pursue it in some way. So I think in that way it was really good for my like self-image and my identity, and that's pretty, that's a pretty invaluable thing to have when you're a young person. You don't really have any sense of like strong identity yet.
Yeah, definitely. And writing kind of gave that to you, as it does to me. It gives you something to express and something to nearly cling onto.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really interesting, and it's such an honest answer as well. And then talking about your younger self, one of the questions I want to ask is, what type of letter would you write to your teenage self, and what would you say?
Oh God. It's difficult because I actually feel a lot of I feel like still very close. I don't feel like a very big remove from who I was when I was a teenager. Um, I remember having a chat with one of my friends, like when I was in Waterford when I was about 15 or 16. My friend, do you know Kathy Burke, who's the illustrator?
Yes,
Yes.
her sister actually teaches me.
Oh, really? No way.
Yeah.
So I was very close friends with Kathy when I was in school, and I remember us having a chat one night when we were about 15 or 16, and talking about like when it is that you start feeling like a real person, like like compared to when I was 12, now I'm a real person, and I think once I did have that moment when I was about 15 of being like, oh, this is sort of who I am. And obviously you change massively and your personality traits change, but I actually don't feel that different as a person essentially from that 15-year-old. And like when I think about the things I was interested in doing and the kinds of people I wanted to spend time with and things I wanted to try and create, like all of that is still pretty similar. But then I did have a really off-piste period in my life when I left school. So I think if I was to be writing to anyone, it would probably be 19-year-old Megan, because that was sort of when I needed the most support, or I was the most at sea in my life. And I guess it was just that I didn't know how to sort of take my time with things. And then when I failed at college, I just got so off. I was so off the rails when that happened, because it was such a shock to me to have failed in some massive way like this, or what felt like a massive way. And so I would really, if I was to address my teenage self, I would like let 15-year-old Megan go and do what she's doing. She was fine. She was like in a pretty good place actually. But yeah, 19-year-old me, I think just needed like to calm down for a minute and stop catastrophizing and stop thinking that university was the end of everything, because it turned out fine in the end, but it was just a very stressful time.
Yeah. And as a writer, there's so many avenues you can take to get to where you want to be. It's not like other professions, I guess, where you have to specifically go and do that course. And I think that's one of the things that young creatives pigeonhole themselves into going and doing this one course and getting very stressed over it. So that's a really nice piece of advice to take your time.
Because I don't think I always wanted to be a writer from the time I was a teenager anyway, but I was sort of just busy having a good time. And I don't even mean that in like I don't mean that by to say I was partying or whatever. I was just enjoying being a teenager, and I was very creative, but in a sort of way that was facilitated by my relationships with people, as in like my friendships even with Kathy or whatever. We would like draw and make things together, and I wasn't very career minded. I just was enjoying my life. And then when I did, when I left school and thought, well, I do want to be a writer, what do I have to do? I thought the only thing you could do is do English in Trinity. And then when I didn't get that was sort of the beginning of my confidence faltering. So, but yeah, as you say, it really made absolutely no difference where I did or didn't go to college in the end. I mean, less than no difference.
Brilliant. Yeah. And so you write very raw pieces, like we've said, very confessional writing. And as a writer, what kind of emotions do you experience before publishing a confessional piece? Because you put so many emotions into it, but what does it feel like right before you're about to publish?
That's a great question. Yeah. So it's just to preface this a little bit. It's been a little while since I've done that sort of writing, just because I've been working on longer form things and the book that I've written and things like that. So it's been probably about a year and a half since I've done that sort of writing. But I obviously had a period of about 5 years where it was pretty much all I did. So going on that experience, most of the time, I don't mean this in a sort of self-aggrandizing way, but I wouldn't be publishing anything that I didn't feel proud about, you know. So even if it was something that was about a really sensitive subject and very personal to my life, I would have to think it was good writing to want to publish it. So usually I just feel pretty excited because it's stuff that I usually with those pieces will have spent a number of, at least in a couple of weeks, but usually a number of months working on them in some way or another. So by the time they're about to come out, I usually feel pretty hyped to get them out there. And also, again, maybe this sounds like almost a little bit exhibitionist or something, but when it is about a sensitive topic, from my experience with this, I know that when you write those things, it does hit people harder and has the potential to mean a lot to people if it's about something that they find it difficult to express about themselves. So usually I feel pretty hyped, you know. I feel good about connecting with people, which is sort of the whole point of what I'm doing as a writer is, and as a person, is just like I like to talk to people. So yeah, I feel good. Yeah.
Good. And that's not exhibitionist at all. And that's such a thing I think us, writers do, is we don't want to hype ourselves up too much, but it's amazing what you do. And especially with the book that you've published now. Tell me a little bit about it.
So yeah, it's called Acts of Desperation, and it'll be out in March next year, on the 4th of March in the UK, and then a couple of weeks later in the US then. So actually, yeah, that book is a novel, but it did start its sort of life as a piece of personal nonfiction. When I met my agent Harriet, I only until that point I'd barely written any fiction at all, just a couple of fragments and little bits of story, but mainly it had been essays. So when I first started to speak to Harriet and we were talking about our ideas for a book, it seemed pretty obvious that it would be nonfiction and maybe a sort of loose collection of essays or a sort of analysis of something about intimacy or relationships. But anyway, then I started writing something. This would have been in 2016, I think, and I started writing what I thought would be an essay or some piece of nonfiction about this particular relationship I had had. And then as I was writing it, I was sort of getting at these quite interesting ideas or ideas that I wanted to go into more, but it wasn't being served by the form, by being nonfiction. There were things that either I couldn't say because it was about a real person and a real life. So either I couldn't say something, or there were things that I thought would be interesting in the story, but they didn't happen. So then I thought, okay, well, I'll write a novel then. So I changed it. I kind of ripped up those first couple of thousand words and started again and made it a fictional relationship. And obviously it has some things in common with my experiences and my feelings, because it is a very internal sort of book. A lot of it is just psychological, and this person's, the narrator's perspective on a romantic relationship that is very unhealthy and sort of doomed. So a lot of it is based on feelings that I've had, but the events are fictional, but yeah, so that took about, no, I think it was 3 years between me starting it and when we sold it. And then there was a further year, the year just gone by, where it was being edited and we were doing sort of additional scenes and little bits and pieces, but it's all done now. So it's just waiting till March.
Brilliant. And that's such an interesting writing style, in taking things that actually happened and putting in or forming them around a fictional story or fictional characters. It's a really, really interesting style, and it's a really interesting kind of process you have.
Yeah, it's because I think it's just out of necessity, really, because I don't have a background in doing, you know, the way some people grow up writing totally fantastical stories, or, you know, sci-fi, or you know, just have great imagination, basically. And I've never had that sort of that sort of relationship with writing. It's always been sort of observational rather than creative in that way, where you're creating out of nothing. So then I used to think that that meant I could never write a novel or write fiction, because that was my skill set. So, you know, I'd have to just write nonfiction. But then, you know, the more you read, you kind of come across all these really interesting examples, like Chris Kraus and a couple of other people that I'd read in 2015, 16, who, you know, either do sort of auto fiction, or like Nausgaard writes things that are, you know, called fiction but really are his life, and just all these sort of variants on what fiction can mean. So when I had a better sense of that, I felt that I had the permission in some way to try and do that myself. And obviously, it's difficult in a sort of logistic way how to do that, because you can't involve real people in events that you've made it up. So it can't be too messy in that way, or else you'll get sued. but you know, there's obviously a thousand other ways to do things. And for me, yeah, it was just having had these experiences in my life that had massive impacts, and then sort of using the feelings, but then attaching them to fictional events.
Yeah, yeah. And can I ask, is your book very kind of Irish in a sense that it's based in Ireland, or
Yeah, so it's set in mainly in Dublin, in the time period starting in 2012, and then it goes on up to the present of when I finished the book, so 2019. And so the action is kind of set between Dublin and then Waterford occasionally, when the narrator, who's not named, but when the narrator comes home and goes, you know, home for Christmas or to visit parents or whatever. And then the action sort of changes into the present day to be in Athens in Greece. So those are the three places where it's set.
oh, very good. Okay. And you're a Waterford based writer yourself. Well, you're Waterford born,
Yeah.
and you're still based in London, are you?
Yeah, I'm in London now. Yeah, I was actually in Waterford for quite a long time during lockdown, though, because the last lockdown, because I was in New York when I was meant to be in New York for a couple of months in March, and then obviously all the COVID stuff happened, so I ended up flying back to home, and I was there for 3 months with my parents in Waterford, so had
Yeah.
a long old stretch there.
I was just about to ask, how is it writing by yourself, kind of away from family in COVID times?
So when I was in Waterford, my mom very kindly set up the front room as an office for me to use. So even though I was going really mad with the COVID stuff, just being away from my friends for so long, really, and not knowing when it would end, but I had a lot of work to do, which was sort of a mixed, you know, it was kind of a curse and a blessing to have something to do, but very hard to concentrate, obviously. But I had a lot of edits to do on the book. So I was doing those while in my mum's house, and that was quite handy because, you know, I get on really well with my mum, and we could have a glass of wine after I finished for the day. That was great. And at the moment, um, I'm very lucky at the moment because of the once the book had sold, I used that money to be able to live alone at the moment in London. So I have plenty of space, and that's all I've ever really wanted for my writing life, because I'm used to house shares where there was, you know, 5 or 6 people in a house, never very easy to get a quiet moment. So at the moment, I've got pretty ideal circumstances to write in, um, but I'm finding it pretty hard to concentrate when everything is going on. But I'm trying not to be too hard on myself. I'm researching the next book that I'll write at the moment, so I'm trying to focus on the research and the reading part, and let the writing come when it will, because I don't want to, you know, this kind of time is hard enough for everyone, so I don't want to make it any harder than it has to be.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's such an idea to get motivated during all this, but it is very difficult, especially if you're creating something personal, you know, it's very hard to take that out of yourself in a crisis, you know, never mind normally. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Brilliant. Okay. And that's all the questions I have at the moment. But I had another off the top of my head there. What do you see yourself writing in the future? How do you see yourself going? Because you've kind of gone from confessional writing to fiction, but still using the confessional writing style to the start. So how
Yeah.
do you see yourself progressing?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So a lot of people did say when I started out writing in that sort of style, you'll run out of things to write about, which I don't agree with as a concept, and I haven't found that personally. But I have found that the older I've gotten, it's not that I'm more cautious with my privacy or anything really, but I think your life kind of tends to stabilize a little bit if you're lucky when you get older, So I used to live in a sort of way that meant I was moving around a lot physically. I would live in different places a lot. B, I had more transient relationships with people, things that maybe weren't as meaningful and lasted less time. And so you would have all these sort of fleeting experiences that are quite interesting, and they're also easy to write about because you don't know the people anymore. The experience isn't like alive for you in your current life. Whereas now, if I was to write about an ex-boyfriend, I'm really good friends with my ex-boyfriend, you know what I mean? Like, and he's still in my life, and I have a sort of calmer personal life than I used to. So there is sort of less material, but and especially obviously this year, nothing has happened to me this year because we've all been inside for a year. So it has become hard for me to. I don't particularly want to anyway at the moment be writing really personal things, but even if I did want to this year, I think I would struggle. And also, I guess I write a column every 2 weeks, and that's not super confessional, but it is personal. It's my kind of observations about life and about art and stuff like that. So I think, given that I do that every 2 weeks, that's sort of enough for me at the moment in terms of personal writing, and I wouldn't really want to do a lot more. That's not to say I never will, and in fact, I can definitely see a future in which, once I've written a couple of novels, I would then write essays again, or more seriously, because it was sort of always my dream to write fiction or to write a novel, and that's the sort of thing that I like to read. So it's obviously what I most wanted to create. And I never thought I would, just because, as I said earlier, I thought that nonfiction was what I was good at. So now that I do know I can write a novel, I want to do as many of those as I can while I can do them. And that's sort of to do with some kind of not very nice material things as well as creative. So because my book has been, the debut novel has been sold, I sold the 2-book deal, which means I'll get another chance now to write another novel. And then who knows, like, how the industry will see me after this one comes out or after the second one comes out. You just have no idea. Like, the people could either not like your existing work, or just the sort of cultural trends could turn, and you're not as in demand. So while I am in demand at all, I'm gonna take advantage of that and write novels and try and write a lot of them. So I've got to write the next one by the end of. I'm going to aim to have a draft in by the end of the summer next year, and then in an ideal world, I'll just keep doing that every 2 years until they won't let me do it anymore.
And that's
Yeah.
brilliant. And in a time of such uncertainty, you're already putting more uncertainty on yourself. So fair play to you. Like, it must be nerve-wracking.
Yeah. So the lucky thing for me is that because I have the journalism background, even when creatively I don't have a lot going on inside me, or I'm not very in demand creatively for that kind of work, I'm sort of safe enough because I have the journalism in my back pocket, and that's a pretty good thing to have as a writer, is the ability to make a little bit of money by doing whether it's interviews or reviewing or anything like that, just kind of more prosaic skills that you can do when you are a bit drained creatively, and you don't have to give so much of yourself personally to them. But sorry, I think I didn't really answer your original question there, which was that the next book that I'm writing is totally not personal at all, and is a novel in the third person. And about people that have no relationship to my life at all. So that's pretty daunting, but very exciting as well to be doing that for the first time.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And so I think I'll end on the age-old question that we always have to ask at a young person's festival. What advice would you give to a young person starting out writing, particularly your style of writing?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, if you're writing essays or confessionally at all in poetry or whatever other form, the best thing that I could say is to get someone else to read it as soon as possible. Just because I think otherwise, if you're keeping it to yourself for any length of time, it can become a bit self-indulgent, or that's what I found anyway, is that you don't really, because of it's things that are close to your heart, it's difficult to know what's actually interesting from an external point of view and what is just sort of attached to your own personal your heart about it. So I think, I mean, this is very basic advice you give to any writer, but I think especially with confessional writing, if you have someone in your life that you trust to look at it and give it even a little bit of feedback, do that as soon as possible. And then the other thing I would say is that it is compared to some other forms, it's a pretty marketable way of writing. So it's the kind of thing that you should be able to pitch to pretty large publications if you have a good some solid idea to attach it to. You know, if it's not, it can't just be I feel this way and here's my feeling. But if you have an interesting concept to attach these experiences of yours or these feelings of yours to, then it is a pretty good way to start because it is something people like to publish, and readers love it, you know. But people love to read anything intimate and that they feel is being a bit brutally honest about someone's internal life. Everyone loves that, really.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being brutally honest with us today and for giving us a little snippet into your writing and your life. Would you like to just finish saying your book and when it's going to come out again?
Yes. So the book, I'll grab it actually. I'll show you the cover. So yeah, this is the book. It's called Acts of Desperation.
It's gorgeous.
Oh, thank you. And it's out on the 4th of March next year in 2021.
Brilliant, brilliant. Megan, thank you so much again. This has been fabulous.
Thank you.